My name is Vivian. I'm 30 years old, living in Portland, and I used to believe that no matter how many times I failed, at least family would always be a place to come back to. Until that night, when I slid my key into the front door of my childhood home and realized the lock had been changed. No warning. No one replied to my messages. Only one line came through from my sister. Don't come back. Everything's already been packed. There's no place for you in this family anymore. I stood frozen in the dark, my hands shaking, and my bank account empty. Have you ever been cut off by your own blood as if you never existed? Leave a comment if you've ever been betrayed by your own flesh and blood. Hit like if you've ever had to stand up again after your hardest fall. And don't forget to subscribe because that shock was just the beginning. I don't remember the first exact moment I felt small in my own home, but I remember the feeling, like there was always a sheet of glass between me and the rest of the family. I'd say something, they heard it, but they didn't really listen. I'd laugh, they looked, but they didn't really see. When Jessica walked into a room, my parents' eyes lit up with pride. Me, I got a few half-hearted nods or a reminder to do better. Jessica was 5 years older than me, always earned perfect grades, dressed the part, spoke at the right times, and knew exactly how to make adults adore her. She never had to try for recognition. But me, I was different. I preferred sketching over solving equations. I daydreamed a lot and spent my afternoons gluing scraps of fabric into miniature dresses for dolls instead of doing group projects. And that difference earned me the label odd. She's always cutting up fabric, doesn't think about her future, my mom once said, thinking I couldn't hear. Sewing is a hobby, not a job. She's no Jessica. That sentence stayed with me for years, like a tiny scratch that never healed. But even in that house where every creative dream felt like a waste, there was one tiny corner where I was allowed to just be myself. Grandma Evelyn's kitchen. She was my dad's mother, a retired seamstress from a small town in Maine before she moved to Asheville to live with us. When I turned 8, she began sitting me beside her after school every afternoon. She handed me fabric scraps, a small pair of scissors, and an old hand sewing machine. I'd sit for hours stitching crooked seams while she patiently praised them as full of spirit. "You have the hands of a storyteller," she once said, eyes sparkling as she held up the first little fabric pouch I'd made. "And a storyteller never needs to be like anyone else." I looked up at her and saw the warmth I never found in my mother's eyes. Grandma Evelyn was the only one who ever asked me what I truly loved, then sat quietly for hours as I babbled about twirly skirts with flower-shaped buttons. One evening, when I was 11, I was in the kitchen sewing a dress. My mom walked by, frowned, and said, "Still wasting time on that stuff? Jessica's working on her SAT practice test. Couldn't you learn something from her?" I froze. Grandma Evelyn stood up, calm but firm, and stepped between us. "Time belongs to the one living it," she said, her gaze steady on my mother. "And if Vivian spends hers creating something from nothing, that's not called wasting, it's called building." My mother didn't reply. She just turned and walked away, but my chest felt strangely warm. From then on, I spent more time in the little back room Grandma Evelyn had claimed for me. She left me her stash of lace, buttons, thread, and an old singer she called the most loyal friend of an independent soul. We built a whole world there, filled with sketches I only shared with her, dreams I only dared to whisper while we cut fabric under that warm yellow light. "Vivian," she once said as I stitched a tiny linen cloak, "when people shut their eyes out of fear or ignorance, be the one who dares to open yours, daring to see differently, to do differently. That's true courage." I didn't fully understand her words then, but they stayed with me, like a seed buried deep, waiting to sprout. By the time I got to high school, Jessica had already earned a full-ride scholarship in finance. The relatives praised her non-stop, the future of Carter Realty. I, on the other hand, stayed immersed in color and design. Every sketch I brought home was folded and tucked away by my mother like something shameful. "No one pays people to draw dresses," she said, "and we're not funding college so you can chase fantasies." I tried to convince them to let me apply to Parsons or SCAD. I submitted designs to school competitions and won. But in the end, my mom placed a brochure for the University of Oregon's business program in front of me and said, "This is your only option. Otherwise, you pay for it all yourself." I chose that school. I studied economics like a ghost, but every night I snuck out my old sketches and photos of dream outfits, trying to relight the spark inside me in my dorm. I worked part-time at a fabric shop, saved every minimum wage dollar to buy material and experiment. Grandma Evelyn had passed away during my freshman year, but before she left, she held my hand and whispered softly, "Don't let them steal your light, Vivian. And if one day you find the world turning its back on you, remember, I'm still watching from somewhere very close." That memory, I carry it with me even now. In my heart, Grandma Evelyn never left, and maybe it's because she never did, that I had the strength to stand in front of that locked door that night and whisper to myself, "Something's wrong, and I have to get to the truth." I left Portland on a cold October morning. The startup I'd poured my heart into had shut down after 3 failed funding rounds. The team scattered. I stood in my empty apartment, telling myself failure was just temporary, but my bank account said otherwise. I had exactly $836 left, too little to rent again, too much to accept that I was homeless. I drove 6 hours to Asheville, my old car rattling on every curve. One thing echoed in my mind, just a few months, find work, save, move on. I didn't expect hugs or comfort. I just needed a roof and a bit of breathing room to rebuild. Jessica opened the door when I rang the bell. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe, pausing on my bag. "You're back?" she said flatly. "How long?" "A few months," I answered, "just until I find work again." She didn't nod, didn't smile. She just turned and called out, "Mom, Vivian's here." Dinner that night was thick with tension. Mom asked one question, "Are you applying to Carter Realty?" Dad stayed silent, eyes fixed on his plate as always. "I'm looking for design jobs," I replied, trying to sound calm. "I just need a place to get stable." Jessica smirked. "Stable," meaning no real plan. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I used to think that if I stayed calm, stayed patient, maybe they'd take me seriously. But each meal made me feel like more of a shadow in my own home. After 3 weeks, Jessica started laying down rules. My room had to be cleaned on a schedule, laundry kept separate. I had to pitch in for utilities. Even with barely paid freelance gigs, I handed my mom $200 a month and never complained. "This isn't a hostel," she said. "Everyone has responsibility." I nodded. I cooked dinner. I mopped the floors. I tried not to give them any excuse to call me a burden, but in Jessica's eyes, everything I did still seemed insufficient. One night at dinner, Jessica was going on about how the company struggled to connect with younger clients. Flyers and signs weren't cutting it anymore. I cautiously offered, "What if you tried virtual experiences, like an AR home tour, maybe even TikTok? It's fast, spreads easily, a little creativity might help." I hadn't even finished the thought before Jessica burst out laughing. "TikTok? You mean we're going to dance through houses to sell real estate?" My mother laughed along. "Vivian, this is Carter Realty, not some artsy playground." I sat still, hollow inside. What had I really lost by speaking up? A chance to show my worth? A hope to be heard? That evening, I sat in my room, laptop open, ready to finish a design for a small order, but my hand wouldn't move the mouse. I just stared at the empty screen, feeling myself slowly disappear. No one in that house truly wanted me to exist there. Close to midnight, Jessica walked in without knocking. "Turn off the light. Mom's got guests early tomorrow." I looked at her, surprised. "You just said I'm an adult now, not a kid who needs controlling." "Then act like it," she snapped. "Stop drawing, stop hiding, and stop leeching off us." I stood up. "I'm not leeching. I work, I contribute. I'm not your punching bag." "Oh, punching bag?" she scoffed. "You think I want you here? You're a failure, Vivian. 10 years later and still clinging to scraps of fabric? You think Evelyn would be proud if she saw what you've become? I stepped closer, heart pounding. Don't mention her. She's dead, Jessica said, not blinking. All that's left is us, and we're tired of making room for you. I don't remember how I walked out of the house or how my hand let go of the doorknob. I just remember the cold slicing through the night, wind howling in my ears, and the aching emptiness inside me. I wandered to the gas station at the end of the street, bought a bitter cup of coffee, and sat on a plastic chair outside. One question echoed in my head. How could they treat me like this? The next morning, I came back, clutching a sliver of hope. Maybe someone felt guilty, maybe they'd let me in. But the locks were changed. No key worked, no message came, no one answered my calls. Only one line appeared from Jessica's number. Don't come back, your stuff's packed. Pick it up by Saturday before 5 p.m., we won't be home. I stood frozen before the door that once opened to warm breakfasts and laughter blended with radio static. Now, there was only silence and a foreign lock, colder than the gaze of my own kin. I stayed up all night in my car, parked in a corner lot next to a suburban gas station, where a dim yellow light flickered onto the fogged windshield. The back seat was cramped, but I didn't dare lie down. I was afraid to sleep, afraid that waking would feel even worse. I curled up in my old coat, arms wrapped tightly around the portable sewing machine I'd brought from Portland. It wasn't valuable, but it was the only thing left that reminded me I still existed. Around dawn, I set the machine on the car seat, pulled out my phone, and searched for resale prices. $150, maybe $200, enough for a few nights in a cheap room. My finger hovered over the Post for Sale button when a new email alert popped up. Subject line: Evelyn Carter Foundation, urgent. Contact request. Sender: Samuel Price. Price and Lowell, attorneys at law. I hesitated a moment, then opened the email. My eyes scanned the lines, my heartbeat rising. Dear Miss Vivian Carter, I am Samuel Price, legal representative of the Evelyn Carter Foundation, established by Mrs. Evelyn Carter prior to her passing. As per the terms of a trust document signed directly by Mrs. Carter, we are authorized to contact you in the event of any violation involving your rights to inheritance or residence. I froze. My hand trembled as I held the phone. Below was another line. Attached video. Video only open if you've been cast out by the family. I plugged in my earbuds and hit play. The screen lit up with Evelyn's face, recorded in a small room under warm light. Her hair had turned almost completely silver, but her eyes were as I remembered, sharp, kind, and knowing. Vivian, if you're watching this, they've betrayed you. Her first words struck like lightning. I couldn't breathe. I hoped I was wrong, she continued gently. I hoped they never pushed you out. I hoped you never had to sleep in a car, never got called a freeloader. But if that's happened, you need to know, I prepared for this day. I didn't blink. She sat upright, holding a stack of papers. I love you, Vivian, not because you're successful, not because you make anyone proud. I love you because you've held on to who you are while everyone else tried to mold you into something else. And for that, I created a private trust, a separate home, a legal shield, just for you. No matter what they say, no matter what they do, you still have me. You still have a right to rise. The video ended in silence. I pulled out my earbuds, gripping the steering wheel, tears falling freely. She had known. She had seen it all. I immediately dialed the number listed in the email. A man answered, voice calm and respectful. Price and Lowell, this is Samuel. This is Vivian Carter, I said quickly. I got your email. Thank you for calling, Miss Carter, he replied, pausing briefly. I'd like to meet with you as soon as possible. What Evelyn left behind isn't just an inheritance, it's a legal structure. Delicate, but very intentional. Could you come to our Asheville office this morning? I glanced at the dashboard clock. 6:30 a.m. I can be there by 8. Perfect. I'll let the front desk know to expect you. His tone softened. And Miss Carter, I'm very sorry for what you've been through. But Evelyn made sure it won't go on for much longer. I hung up. A strange feeling stirred inside me. Not hope, not anger, but something else. Betrayal, now named and confirmed. But at least I had something solid to hold on to. A lifeline, tied by someone who had loved me with everything she had. I changed clothes, rinsed my face with bottled water, pulled my hair back, and started the engine toward downtown. No GPS needed. I knew that law office. Had passed by it many times on the way to school as a child. Never imagined the day I'd walk in. Not to sign a lease, but to reopen a door sealed shut since the moment Evelyn passed. I parked in front of the 10-story glass building. The sun hadn't fully risen, but early light began casting soft shadows across the stone sidewalk. My palms were damp as I stepped through the entrance. The receptionist smiled and handed me a visitor badge. "Mr. Price is expecting you, 8th floor." The elevator moved slowly. I caught my reflection in the steel walls, messy hair, tired eyes, a worn coat, but I lifted my chin. Eveland hadn't recorded that message for someone who would give up. When the doors opened, a salt-and-pepper-haired man stood waiting in the hallway, hand extended. "Samuel Price, pleased to meet you, Miss Carter." I shook his hand, my voice slightly hoarse. "Thank you for reaching out." "Of course," he said, firm but kind. "We have a lot to discuss, and I believe it's time you reclaimed what's rightfully yours." I sat in the 8th floor meeting room, gripping a cooling cup of water. The room was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the clock. Across from me, Mr. Samuel Price flipped through a thick folder. Sunlight from the large window behind him streamed across the pages, making the printed words feel almost alive. "Mrs. Evelyn began setting up this trust 8 years ago," he said, his voice even and slow, as if giving me time to process every detail. "Its official name is the Vivian Carter Independent Creative Trust." I looked up. She never mentioned it to me. She kept it private on purpose. In her notes, she said she feared the family would try to interfere or misuse the trust if they knew about it in advance. He looked directly at me, his eyes free of judgment, filled only with understanding. I believe she was right. I swallowed hard, a mix of gratitude and heartache swelling in my chest. "The trust was created with 2 main objectives," he continued. "First, to provide financial support for your fashion design career, including tuition, materials, and brand development costs. Second, to protect your right to live in any Carter-owned property in case of conflict or denial of basic entitlements." He pulled out a property map and placed it in front of me, using a pen to mark a line. "The house on Cedar Creek Road, the one you used to live in, is not personally owned by Daniel or Carol. It's held in a separate trust, overseen by the Evelyn Carter Foundation, with a clearly stated clause. Any direct blood descendant of the Carter family, including you and Jessica, has the right to reside there in times of need. No one has the authority to unilaterally deny another's right to live there." I stared at the bolded text. My heart thudded wildly, caught between shock and disbelief. So, I exhaled. They had no right to change the locks or kick me out? "Correct," Mr. Price nodded. "And that's only part of it." He flipped to the next section, stopping at a detailed financial statement. When Mrs. Evelyn established the trust, it held a value of $250,000. After interest accrual and authorized expenses, the remaining balance is about $143,000. He paused, then slid the report toward me. "But there's a serious issue." My eyes locked onto the expense column. Pool installation, gym construction, French kitchen upgrades. I couldn't look away from the final figure, unauthorized withdrawals totaling $82,700. My hand clenched. Who signed off on these? Mr. Daniel and Mrs. Carroll were 2 of the 3 appointed co-trustees along with a neutral party, our firm. But in the last 3 years, certain approvals were pushed through under infrastructure repair for housing safety. At the same time, the transactions coincide with Jessica's pool parties and social media posts about the new gym. A chill spread through me. I pictured my mother laughing beside a glass of white wine by the glittering pool. Jessica posing in designer activewear in a mirrored gym filled with imported equipment, all of it paid for with the funds Evelyn had set aside for me. No one ever said a word. They knew about the trust? Yes, Mr. Price confirmed. By law, they had to sign acknowledgement forms when named as trustees. However, Mrs. Evelyn included a special clause. If misuse is discovered, a trustee can be removed and required to repay the misused funds, plus interest. I felt my breath quicken. A storm of emotions swirled inside: resentment, humiliation, and a quiet grief. Not because of the money, because of the silence, the complicity, the way they watched me struggle and never once reached out. Mm. So what can I do now? I asked, my voice hoarse. You have the right to petition for trustee removal, demand reimbursement of misused funds, and most importantly, reclaim your right to the house, legally. Mr. Price leaned back, fingers interlocked. But I don't think you have to do it alone. I lifted my head. He slid a business card across the table, the name printed in bold. Frank Carter. Uncle Frank? I murmured, barely believing it. He's Daniel's younger brother, and the final person Evelyn entrusted with a copy of her will. He's never supported how your family treated you. I clutched the card in my hand, a faint spark rising inside. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. And maybe what Evelyn left behind wasn't just money. It was a chance to reclaim my voice. That afternoon, I sat in my car holding the card Mr. Price had given me, torn with hesitation. It had been over 10 years since I'd heard anything about Uncle Frank. In my memory, he was tall and lean, always wearing sunglasses, soft-spoken but sharp-eyed. When I was little, he'd secretly slip me colored pens or fancy paper scraps and say, "A creative girl needs more than praise, she needs tools." Then one day, he'd disappeared. My mother only said, "Frank's no longer part of this family." I once overheard a hushed argument between my parents, something about company shares, how Uncle Frank was forced to sell his stake at a low price because he refused to sign off on a shady investment deal. After that, his name vanished from all meetings, parties, and conversations. I dialed the number on the card. The line rang 3 times before a deep male voice answered. "Hello? Uncle Frank? It's me, Vivian." There was a pause. I could almost hear him take a long breath. "Vivian?" His voice dropped, slow and hesitant. "Are you okay?" "Not really," I admitted, "but I need to see you. It's about Grandma, about something serious. Tonight, 6 p.m., cafe at 72 Laurel Street, Evelyn's old spot." I wasn't surprised he chose that place. It was where Grandma used to take me for birthdays. Not fancy, but quiet, with lemon butter cake she always said could fix a bad day. I arrived 15 minutes early, choosing the table by the window. The sky was dusky, golden light slanting across the polished wood of the old table. The scent of roasted coffee and warm pastries crept into my coat sleeves, stirring memories I thought I'd forgotten. Uncle Frank arrived exactly on time, neither early nor late. Still tall, still sharp-owned, though his hair was now salt and pepper and his walk a bit slower. He sat without a word at first, just studying me like he was looking for something familiar. "You've grown," he said, "but you still have Evelyn's eyes. Eyes that won't back down, even when no one stands beside them." I gave a soft smile. "I thought you didn't want anything to do with this family anymore." "I didn't," he said plainly, "until Evelyn sent me a letter 3 months before she passed." From his coat pocket, he pulled out an old envelope, yellowing at the edges with a blue ink border. I recognized her delicate handwriting instantly. "You got a letter from her?" "It wasn't just a letter," he said, pushing the envelope toward me. "It was a request." I opened it with trembling hands. In my mind, I could hear her voice reading each word. Frank, if you're reading this, it means Vivian has reached the end of her rope. You understand her, just like you once understood your brother. You also know Jessica won't stop unless someone intervenes. Daniel is too weak to fight back. As for Carol, I don't blame her. She simply chooses to side with whoever seems stronger. Frank, I need you to help Vivian stand on her own. Not because she shares our blood, but because she deserves to. At the bottom, in her familiar handwriting, was one final line, a legal battle for fairness, if necessary. I finished reading with a lump in my throat and a fire rising in my chest. Even in her final days, she had prepared everything for me, including leaving behind an unexpected ally. I was kicked out of the house, I told him, right after confronting Jessica. They changed the locks, cut all contact. Then I found out that house doesn't even belong to them. Uncle Frank nodded. I know. Evelyn didn't make it easy for them to take everything. But she also knew you couldn't fight all three of them alone, with their money, influence, and reputation at Carter Realty. They used over $80,000 from my creative trust for a pool and gym. He didn't flinch. I believe you. Daniel did something similar with my shares once. I looked up at him, eyes burning with a mix of anger and regret. Would you be willing to testify? I need someone from the inside. Someone who saw how they treated her and the family. Uncle Frank stared at me for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. You've got evidence, I've got experience, and most importantly, we've got Evelyn Carter behind us. So not only will I testify, I'll stand with you to the very end. I took a deep breath. Outside, the sky was slipping into dusk, but inside me a fire had been lit. No longer just a flickering candle struggling in the dark, but a steady, clear light from someone who had quietly watched from the shadows and was now ready to step forward for the woman who had trusted us until her last breath. That morning, I arrived at the Price & Lowell law office almost 30 minutes early. I sat silently in the conference room, gazing through the large glass window where the oak trees were turning red in the southern autumn. Samuel Price reviewed his files, sharp eyes peering through thin-rimmed glasses. Uncle Frank sat to my left, arms crossed, his face calm but his gaze unwavering. The door opened precisely at 9 a.m. Jessica walked in first, her usual stride, a designer purse swinging at her side. Her face was bare but carefully composed. My mother followed closely, clutching her handbag like it was the only thing keeping her upright. My father came in last, slow, eyes lowered, not meeting anyone's gaze. Their attorney, Susan Ellis, was a pale-skinned woman with platinum hair, known for representing Carter Realty in major deals. She nodded at Mr. Price, then opened her laptop. No greetings, no pleasantries, just tension so thick you could feel it hum in the air. I'll begin, Mr. Price said, his tone neutral and firm. The purpose of this meeting is to clarify acts of misuse related to Mrs. Evelyn Carter's trust, as well as violations of the legal right to residence stated in the trust documents. He slid a folder across the table. Included are a video recorded by Mrs. Evelyn, a handwritten letter to witness Frank Carter, financial statements, trust management logs, and a formal petition for legal intervention filed by my client Vivian Carter. I remained silent. Every word had been prepared. I wanted the facts to speak for themselves. Jessica flipped through the folder, scanned a few pages, then looked up and stared directly at me. Do you really think I meant to steal from you? Mr. Price cut in before I could answer. It's not just what she thinks. Here are the specific withdrawals. $32,000 for pool construction, $20,000 for gym equipment, $12,000 for kitchen upgrades, $8,000 for lounge furnishings, all taken from the Vivian Carter Creative Trust, which was established for her education and career development. Susan Ellis let out a soft scoff. It's possible there was a misunderstanding. Everything was spent improving a shared residence, which belongs to both sisters. Residence, Mr. Price said, pausing on each word, is not shared property. The house on Cedar Creek Road is held under a separate trust within the Evelyn Carter Foundation, and the primary clause states, no funds may be spent without directly benefiting Vivian's professional growth. I looked at Jessica, her eyes wavered. Then, like someone flipped a switch, she covered her face with one hand, her voice cracking. I didn't know. I thought. Thought what? Samuel pressed. I thought it was family money, Mom said. My mother jerked in surprise, turning to Jessica. I never told you to withdraw that way. You said I could renovate the house. You nodded. You didn't say you'd use trust money, she replied, voice trembling. Jessica said nothing. Mr. Price opened a second, thicker file, this one with a blue cover. In more detail, he said. This is a record of a petition filed to amend Mrs. Evelyn's will, submitted 1 week before her passing. It includes a request to remove Vivian from fixed asset inheritance. I turned toward Jessica, heart pounding. The signature on this petition was reviewed by 2 independent forensic analysts. Both concluded the same thing. It was forged. Silence fell over the room. Did you know where that document came from? I finally asked, my voice steady. Where did you get that signature? Jessica didn't answer. Tears still rolled down her face, but I felt no sympathy, only a deep, hollow ache I couldn't name. Mrs. Ellis clicked to close the file. My client acknowledges the points raised, but believes the decisions were made in the family's best interest. Uncle Frank leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but cold. The family's best interest doesn't include kicking a granddaughter out of her ancestral home and using her money to build a luxury backyard. Evelyn knew that, and she didn't leave everything behind so you could stage a scam. My father looked up at Uncle Frank, then turned to Jessica. He spoke. Is it true? He asked, his voice hoarse. Did you really try to change your mother's will? Jessica said nothing. Tears kept falling, but no words came out. My mother dropped her head onto the table. She pulled a tissue from her pocket, her hand trembling. I didn't know things had gone this far. I thought it would just blow over. I took a deep breath. Everything inside me, the humiliation, the silence, the years of living in the shadows, was rising. I didn't want to accuse anyone. I just needed to say something I had held in for far too long. I'm not trying to destroy this family, I said, my voice low but clear. I just want to exist, to be myself. And Evelyn gave me that right, with everything she had left. No one responded, only the sound of wind brushing against the tall glass panels, but I knew from that moment on everything had shifted. This was no longer just about me, it was the truth facing everything they had denied for too long. I placed the file down on the table, no longer weighed down like when I walked in. Through the entire meeting, I realized that what I was seeking wasn't victory, and it certainly wasn't their apology. I just wanted to walk away with my life whole, no longer living in a house filled with denial, no longer fading behind someone else's shadow. I have a specific proposal, I said, looking directly at Miss Ellis. Not out of retaliation, but closure. She nodded. We're listening. I won't take the house back, I began. It's no longer a place I belong, but I request that the remaining funds in the Creative Trust be used to purchase a small apartment for me in Asheville. Not far, but far enough for me to start over on my own terms. Jessica lowered her head. I didn't need to see her face to know her eyes were fixed anywhere but on me. Maybe the floor, maybe the glass wall, but certainly not my direction. I also request that every remaining dollar in that trust, after the home purchase, be transferred to an independent supervisory body. No one in my family will have access to it again. Mr. Price slid a thin file toward the other side of the table, which Miss Ellis took with both hands. We've been in contact with a non-profit financial management group. They can oversee all career investment expenses from the trust with full transparency. I nodded gently. Third, I want peace. No texts, no phone calls, no letters, no happy birthday, no let's reconnect. I paused for a moment, locking eyes with my mother. I no longer need explanations. She didn't protest, just stared down at her palms. My father remained still, his eyes seemingly glued to the button on his vest. Finally, I inhaled, I want Jessica to step down from Carter Realty. 6 months, no title, no involvement, no operations. The air seemed to tighten. Miss Ellis immediately leaned toward Jessica, whispering something. Jessica closed her eyes, hands clenched around the hem of her dress. "This is an excessive demand," Ms. Ellis said, struggling to stay composed. 6 months of inactivity would impact her cash flow and the personal brand she's spent years building. "I'm not asking her to disappear," I said. "I'm asking her to pause, so she has time to understand the difference between entitlement and honor. 6 months is not punishment. It's a chance to reflect. If she refuses, I'll file criminal charges for forgery, misappropriation of trust funds, and obstruction of legal residency rights." Uncle Frank leaned slightly toward me. "You said it clearly. Don't back down." Mrs. Ellis sighed and turned toward Mr. Daniel. "We'll need time to consider." Mr. Price checked his watch. "You have 48 hours to provide a formal response. If we don't receive written consent within that time frame, we'll proceed with legal action as outlined." My mother looked up. Her face no longer held anger or disdain like all the other times I remembered, only fatigue, sketched deep into her eyes. "Do you plan to live alone forever, Vivian?" she asked softly. I looked at her, without anger or blame. "I was never lonely, Mom. I was just alone in my own family." Jessica said nothing. She simply stood, walked out of the meeting room, and never looked back. Miss Ellis gathered the documents, promising to follow up soon. My father rose last, slowly walking behind my mother, his figure casting a weary shadow on the polished white floor. Uncle Frank placed his hand on my shoulder. "You did something few in this family have ever dared. No vengeance, no destruction, just the courage to do what's right and to love yourself." I nodded without speaking. Outside the window, the midday light cast a golden sheen over the worn rooftops of Asheville. I knew I was no longer the woman who had stood outside a locked door days before, and I was no longer the little girl who waited for her mother's nod with a sketch in hand. I was rewriting the terms of my life, with trust, with boundaries, and with the freedom I had reclaimed. I moved into my new apartment on a quiet Monday morning. The 3-story building nestled against the northern hillside of Asheville, where sunlight filtered through oak leaves each morning like a soft greeting to the day. The apartment was small, 2 rooms, an open kitchen. Not spacious, but just enough for me to breathe without feeling cornered. I set the boxes down on the floor, touched the exposed brick wall, and felt a warmth I had never known in all those years living with family. The first thing I unpacked was my old sewing machine, the same one I nearly sold at the gas station that day. I placed it by the window, spread the lace cloth Evelyn had left me across the table, and sat quietly for a few minutes. No ribbon cutting, no ceremony. This was my beginning. Alone, but never lonely again. I spent the first 2 days tidying up, installing fabric racks, organizing sketches and color thread samples into neat spectrums. On Tuesday evening, just as I finished brewing tea, my phone buzzed. A new email had arrived. The sender was Derek Porter. I froze. That name pulled me straight back to my old design class at the community college, where I used to study at night in secret while still living in Portland. Derek was the only one who left a comment on a post I'd made about my very first dress. "You should pursue this seriously." I opened the message. "Vivian, I saw your name on the participant list for the preliminary round of the Fashion Accelerator in Portland. I wasn't surprised. I knew the old you, and I believe in the woman you are today. If you're looking for a collaborator or seed investor, reach out." Damn. I read it again and again, not because I was shocked, but because I was moved. When someone has lived so long in rejection, even a single moment of recognition can feel like a bridge back to themselves. I replied simply, "Thank you. I'm starting a brand called Evelyn and Thread. If you're free, I'd love your input." 3 days later, I was invited to the second interview round of the Fashion Accelerator in Portland. The Zoom meeting took place right at my sewing table, surrounded by unfinished fabric rolls, warm light, and the faint scent of fresh marker ink. I presented the concept for my debut collection, titled Legacy in Thread, every stitch and motif inspired by scraps of fabric my grandmother Evelyn had saved from her days as a seamstress. One of the judges asked, "Why Evelyn and thread?" I answered, "Because I was once forced to sever ties with what made me feel most alive. And my grandmother was the only one who ever rethreaded that line for me." No one spoke for a moment. Then the program director smiled and nodded. "We'll be in touch." While I was pouring everything I had into rebuilding my life from this tiny apartment, changes began surfacing on the other side. Jessica was officially suspended from her role for 6 months, per the legal agreement. But the problems didn't end there. A financial oversight organization began a deeper audit and uncovered a series of questionable expenses linked to Carter Realty's internal fund. There were no major headlines, but in Asheville's real estate circles, everyone knew. Her name began disappearing from cocktail guest lists, one major partner canceled a deal, then a local journalist started tracing the misuse of investor money. My mother began therapy. An old neighbor messaged me saying she had been hospitalized for a week due to exhaustion and chronic insomnia. I didn't visit. I only sent her attending physician a printed copy of the letter Grandma Evelyn had once written to me, with a note, "Help her understand why I left." My father, as always, remained silent. But Uncle Frank later told me he had quietly sold 15% of his company's shares to a New York investment fund. No one knew why. Some said it was to avoid a drawn-out lawsuit. Others guessed it was preparation for retirement. I didn't care about the reason. I only knew this: Carter Realty was no longer untouchable. As for me, I sat in my small kitchen every night brewing mint tea, turning on my sewing machine, and cutting fabric with the quiet resolve of someone stitching herself back together. I wrote the first lines of my brand plan, sketched out a silk-lined coat inspired by my grandmother's shawl, and searched for a supplier of quality embroidery thread. Then, one morning, I got the call. It was from the Fashion Accelerator in Portland. The coordinator's voice came through the phone, clear and warm. "Congratulations, Vivian. We'd like to invite you to join the program." I sat in stillness for a moment, looking out the window as golden red leaves drifted past. Everything around me still felt raw and unfinished. But that didn't matter anymore. Because I didn't have to ask permission to live as myself, and in every thread pulling my life back together, I could feel Grandma Evelyn, present, steady, in the way she'd always been there without ever needing to be seen. I stood at the tall window of my small studio, where I had spent nearly every single day over the past 12 months, cutting, sewing, fitting samples, and sometimes just quietly watching the sunlight stretch across the wooden table. Late afternoon rays filtered through the sheer white curtain and lit up a corner of antique lace I always kept in the same spot. The final piece of lace Grandma Evelyn had left me. The threads were faint now, the edges slightly worn, but each time I looked at it, I was transported back to those afternoons, beside her in the kitchen, surrounded by the scent of mint tea and the hum of her sewing machine. I flipped open my leather notebook and slowly wrote one solid line: "Not everyone who shares your blood is family. But those who believe in you, they are the light." The page curled softly beneath the pen. I set it down and turned back to the mannequin, draped in the opening look for my first showcase at Northwest Fashion Week. A long linen coat, lined with thin silk, hand embroidered with a single phrase: "Evelyn never left." I chose those words not to remind others of her, but to remind myself. Because throughout this past year, in every stitch, every sketch, every decision that felt impossibly small yet deeply personal, I could feel her there. Not in body, but in spirit. In her quiet, unwavering support. When I submitted the Legacy and Thread Collection draft to the Fashion Accelerator, I didn't have high expectations. I just wanted to try, the way she had taught me never to fear failure. But they responded with unexpected enthusiasm. The organizers called to ask if I could prepare 6 pieces within 8 weeks. I said yes, even though I didn't yet have the fabric, the team, or even an industrial steamer. Derek visited the studio 3 days later. He brought a box of cinnamon waffles from the old bakery down the street and a detailed investment proposal. "You've got a voice. Don't let anyone water it down," he said, settling onto the wooden chair I'd been using as a side table. We worked together for weeks after that. He introduced me to a seasoned pattern maker in Portland, connected me with two hand embroidery artisans from the outskirts market, and helped me negotiate my first contract with a boutique in Seattle. Every small step forward made me feel like a part of myself was returning. The part that had once been dismissed as too dreamy, too impractical. One evening, as I was adjusting the shoulder seam of the fourth dress, Uncle Frank called. His voice, warm and slow as always. "Vivian, I just received a letter from Carol." I paused. "She sent it to you?" "Yes, a handwritten note. She apologized, no blame, no asking to come back, just said her daughter's now in therapy and she's learning to accept." I said nothing. I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry. Just still. "Do you want to read it?" he asked. "Not right now," I said softly, "but thank you for telling me." I folded the final thread in my hand and tied a tiny knot. Grandma Evelyn used to say, "Every stitch needs to know when to end." I figured I'd reached the end of the threads from the past. The Fashion Week was held in a small riverside exhibition hall along the Willamette. The day I arrived, there was a light rain, no fanfare, no roaring applause, but my heart beat with an odd kind of peace. Backstage, I adjusted the collar of the lead outfit. A young model with curly hair and bright eyes had just stepped out from behind the curtain. "Whose design is this?" she asked, gently tracing the embroidered lines beneath the silk lining. "My grandmother's name," I smiled. "And mine too." The music began. The lights softened. She walked onto the runway in the first coat of the collection. I didn't look at the audience, I just watched each step. Steady, sure, unapologetic, yet never brash. And when the coat's lining was revealed at the end of the runway, the phrase, "Evelyn never left," shimmered under the lights. I heard a small gasp from the third row. I didn't turn around, didn't need to know who it was. I just stood there, hand resting on the fabric edge, exhaling quietly. There was no thunderous applause, just steady clapping. Enough to know I was no longer the one dismissed as just doodling. I was the heir to a spirit. And at last I had fulfilled the promise I made to Evelyn, to carry the light, even when no one else could hold it for me. What would you do if the very people who were supposed to love you were the ones who pushed you out of the home you once called yours? Would you forgive, or would you rise like I did, not for revenge, but to protect what you believe in? I didn't share this story to complain. I shared it because I believe someone out there is having their dreams dimmed simply because they don't fit the mold. Someone who's been called a burden, who had to leave in silence, who's only ever wanted to be heard. If this story resonates with you, leave a comment below. You might be surprised how not alone you really are. And if you want to follow more true journeys about seemingly perfect families, about choices that aren't easy but necessary, subscribe to the channel. Life has a way of twisting when you least expect it, and sometimes a story is the light you needed at just the right moment.